Hey, my name is Heidi Hybl, and I'm an oil painter. I live in Big Sur. So what I'm going to sort of cover in this 20 minutes is the history. The title of this is Color and Light. So the history of color and light in art, my personal relationship to color and light, why I'm an abstract artist, what my influences are, and what I want to include in my paintings. So I'm going to race through some of this because I only have 20 minutes, but okay, so color and light. There really is no color without light. And the sun gives light to our planets. Plants eat the sun. We eat the sun because we eat plants. And before our era, if you think about it, people didn't really, there was a lot of dark. They didn't have lights at night, and they, sort of worshiped the sun and the moon because they were much more important in our life than, they're still very important in our life, but we just don't realize it. And the cathedrals and churches of Christianity literally set the stage for their ceremonies and services by the use of gold. That's why gold is used so much, because it has that iridescent quality. And in Byzantine churches, they used a lot of mosaics, and sometimes the mosaics were actually three-dimensional. So when you go into these spaces, they would kind of dematerialize the space. There wouldn't be any hard edges. And they used candles and candles basically as the lighting. And they really did set the stage for their ceremonies. So this is not, none of it was done by accident. And it created this kind of spiritual sort of environment. Then in the 13th century, light starts to lose its transcendental status, and it's studied as a manifestation of the terrestrial laws of optics. Science gets introduced, measurements, telescopes, things like that. So people had started to have a different relationship to light. But much later, in the 60s and the 70s, there was it started in California, this light and space movement, which kind of did the same thing. It used color and light to dematerialize objects. And two practitioners of that, well, there are many, but the original people were Robert Irwin and James Turrell. And James Turrell is still around doing things and doing installations. The first Robert Irwin piece I ever saw in a museum was a disc that was a three-dimensional object, but he used the color in such a way that it was against a wall, but you couldn't tell. It just disappeared. The edges disappeared. And I've always been fascinated by that. My own relationship with color is kind of interesting because I started out my creative life as a black and white photographer. So, of course, there's no color there, but I studied the Ansel Adams zone system. And so if you were going to take a picture of an object, you gave it a value. There was like a value from 1 to 10, light and dark value. And my first camera didn't even have a battery in it. You could get a battery, but I didn't have a battery, and because it didn't have an automatic light meter. So I had a handheld light meter, and then I measured the reflected light of the object that I was taking a picture of. So when I switched to painting, I literally didn't see color. I had, the palette out with, of course I studied color. I had the palette out with all of the colors in their order. And I remember just kind of reaching for something. And, if it was green or red or whatever, I reached for it, but I saw it more as its value rather than its color. But it's somewhere along the line, I wanted to use color as color. So I had to move myself in that direction. One more thing about values is that artists will write or talk about the importance of color and value in their paintings. And Matisse, oddly enough, was somebody who thought of the value as kind of the skeleton of the painting. And, when you think of Matisse, you think of these really bright colors, but, he wrote about how, no, it was the value of the colors that formed the skeleton of your composition. So I always thought that was really fascinating. The other thing is I choose abstraction rather than realism because it allows me the freedom to be inventive, and I prefer to consider to use elements that will allow me to kind of gesture at an idea rather than depict something. And I want the viewer to read into the image and then come away with their own interpretation of it. And this is another, just so you can see this. It's actually one of my favorite paintings. So my influences for my art are, I tend to see the world from a 30,000 foot perspective. And I'm looking for broad generalizations and patterns and things. And I like to reduce my compositions to as simple as I can make them. And I usually start out with 2 color spaces sometimes, and then, I'll add things to that. But I need to start where things are really simple. I like really large sweeping gestures, and I collect things. I'm interested in architecture. I grew up right outside the city of Chicago, and Chicago is an architectural center, so there were always new buildings, and I just took a subway downtown and wandered around. Now I live down the coast, and I'm surrounded by the Pacific Ocean and big hills and things like that. So I save things like this when I see it, because I might want to use this shape at some point. And it has that big sweeping gesture thing there's more to it, but I like the top. But another thing that I like is I need more space. I like art that somehow reflects the elements back over a period of time. And this is a sculpture. The Met in New York commissions a sculptor once a year, and they have a kind of an outdoor space that's, I don't know, the 5th or the 7th floor or something like that. And the sculpture is always in that space. So this is a very simple shape with holes in it. And then as the sun passes through, it makes these shadows. And I just,
On the ground.
yes.
On the
And it kind of
structure, yeah.
spreads out.
And it changes the look of it.
Yes, yes. And then there's that element of time as well. Another example of that is this. I don't know if any of you, and I'll
Yes.
pass this around. You've seen this?
Yes, I've seen pictures. I haven't seen it in.
Well, this is in
Close.
downtown Chicago.
Yes.
And it's a really shiny bean shaped. That wasn't the artist. The artist is Anish Kapoor, and he didn't call it the bean, but everybody calls it the bean. And it's as shiny as mylar, but what it is actually steel that's been highly polished.
You can see
And
yourself
same
in it
thing.
too, yeah.
Yeah.
In a distorted shape, yeah.
Yes, and then the change in weather and the change in day, and people love it. They just flock to this thing. This is not a very good photograph of. This is another thing that's put in front of a window, and as the light goes through, it makes shadows here. And I'll just pass that around. This is another example of somewhere along the line, the Interior Design magazine found me, and for years I've been getting this magazine, and it's not really interiors so much. It has a lot of architecture, and again, this is one of those sweeping gestures that I really liked.
I'm sorry, your formal education, you said it was in photography or in architecture?
Well, I did black and white photography.
Okay.
Yes. So I'm also interested in Japanese aesthetics. And the bottom picture on that,
Sushi?
this one, no, the one that you have, the bottom picture, I have learned through Japanese aesthetics and an attention to the details of nature, to appreciate something that isn't, I think in Western culture we want to look at roses and have only perfect blooms. But in Japanese culture, the whole of the bud, the opening, the petals falling off, is part of the whole process. I used to see Japanese art, and it really bothered me. I couldn't figure out what it was that I really loved about it. And I needed to name it somehow, and I kept reading things. And one time I read this article about how the Japanese culture is much more in tune with nature in a way that we aren't. My husband works on bonsai trees, and they incorporate dead parts of a tree. And once I kind of decoded what it was about Japanese art that I liked, I thought, I won't ever be able to do that, because it's like you have to, it's so much part of the culture that to come at it from the outside, I can appreciate it, I can maybe incorporate some of the things about it, but I will never be able to do it like a Japanese artist would. So back to influences, my favorite artists from the past are people like Mark Rothko, of course. I also like Max Beckman, and a not very well-known artist called Marsden Hartley. Do you like Marsden Hartley?
I do.
Yeah. And every time I'm in a museum and, there'll be one of his paintings up there and I look at it, I know instantly who it is, but he's in museums, but he's not as well known as some of the other ones. My favorite contemporary artists are Anish Kapoor, who did that bean, and my all-time favorite artist, contemporary artist, is a woman named Shihoko Fukimoto. I also follow several artists on Instagram. I got talked into starting an Instagram account, and it's one of the best things I ever did. What I want to include in my artwork, consciously, one time I sat down and decided what it was I really wanted to do. I've already talked about the sweeping gestures. Another thing is that the composition is not necessarily contained within its format. I want to suggest that what I'm doing is just one small part of reality. Okay, thank you. And it goes beyond that. It's not, and this is one of the divisions in art, and you have to kind of, you probably have a feel for it. People either, in their composition, within the format, everything's there. Or there's a suggestion of more beyond where this ends. The other thing is I'm interested in capturing a moment in time. I've recently gone back to using circles, and they don't have to be a moon or a sun or anything, and just be, as an abstract artist, I deal with shapes, and shapes have sort of meaning, whether they refer to something in the real world or not. The other thing is I'm in a critique group with plein air painters, and we have a totally different way of looking at the world. And one of the things I like to do is have, it's not a battle exactly, but I want two opposite things to be happening at the same time and have them come together and do some kind of a dance, let's say. So in this particular painting, there's a closed form and then there's open form here. So these two things are in conversation with each other.
Did you have this in Art Association?
Yes.
Yeah, I've seen it, yeah.
Let's see, have I had it there?
Something similar
No.
to this.
But I do have work at the Art Association, yeah.
Can you hold that up?
Yes.
And moon.
I had I had an exhibit there where I did, a bunch of circles. Circles and moons.
Your little HH makes me think of Japanese.
Yes, that's where I got it from. Yeah,
And I actually like your signature as part of the painting.
yeah.
And I'm thinking I'd like actually to see it larger.
Well, I've always had somewhat, sometimes I've signed them on the side because, it becomes, especially in a composition that's somewhat simple and reductive, the signature then becomes a compositional element. And if you do a small thing like that, your eye has a tendency to go right there. But I like that suggestion. I'm not quite comfortable doing that, but and sometimes I just put my last name because I paint that on there, and it draws your eye there rather than the composition. But yeah, I've always had, people like to have them signed, and I don't mind signing them, but sometimes they don't go with the.
I think it makes it more interesting and something to contemplate.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and that is very Japanese.
Yeah.
Okay. And I have, saved like all these pictures of, I like this one in particular, where it has the phases of the moon.
Yeah.
I have stacks of things that I've saved.
Artists are savers.
Yeah.
Yes, I know.
Hoarders, collector.
I've actually organized them, and that makes me think that, I don't have this big mess in my studio. Yeah, I'm glad to know I'm not the only one who does that. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Very interesting.
I like that, like this and this one with the circle here, it does allude to something more,
Yeah,
right? And there's a complexity, but it's also simple.
Signature.
But there's a complexity still, like in your small painting, it's intriguing.
good. I like that word. Yeah, that's.
Thought of it.
I'd throw out another word if I may interrupt, and that's mysterious. I'm not sure what to make of that, because it does look like a moon, but what would be covering up the moon just that way? So you got me really thinking, I wonder what she's doing.
But she doesn't even think of it as a moon.
And she doesn't even think of it as a moon, so it's...
Well, I took
but that's
this-
what I thought of it as.
I took this one to my critique group, and they all wanted me to make this real moon out of it,
Okay.
And I've done that when I've used circles, but it defines it rather than suggests, like you say. And so
Yeah.
then I painted it out because it was too exact for my tastes. Yeah. And then but it bothered them because they wanted it to be a moon, so that I had to explain that. But you know what about this one was, I have a Japanese friend, and she said, that looks like when you go to an inn in Japan and they have lights outside, that it would be a sort of a large glowing disc.
Like a hanging light.
I'm not sure about that, but yeah. And one more thing about Japanese aesthetics is that this is a lady who has a catering business, and I picked this up. But one of the things that I read is that when Japan was sort of forced to be opened up to the Western world, a lot of people went there and were just absolutely fascinated by the art. And one of the things they kept saying was it's so asymmetrical. And, nobody really, hardly anybody paints paintings anywhere that are symmetrical. But I think what they meant was that it was just an extreme version of that. And I think this business card is an example of that, but it's balanced, because it always has to be balanced. You don't want somebody to not look at it because there's something odd. So, and very simple. Perfect.
So what you were saying earlier about Japanese aesthetics, part of it is wabi-sabi.
Yes.
So in case some people haven't heard, wabi-sabi is Japanese aesthetic. So it just kind of emphasizes on impermanence, imperfection, asymmetry, or something rotten or decaying. So we find beauty in something that's not perfect, past its prime. So normally you admire, cherry blossom when it's perfect. But we love cherry blossom because it's so impermanent.
Yes.
So it just kind of falls away after 1 week. So we just enjoy that transition. And we just love those petals on the ground. A lot of ceramics, they are asymmetry, and some have bumps, and they're kind of like childlike ceramics, and that might be made by renowned ceramists. So
Yes.
a lot of those imperfection, we
Yes.
find beauty
Yes.
in it.
Yes.
So I think that's sort of part of what you were alluding to.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that's one of the things well, I had a gardening business for a while, and of course when you work at a hotel or something like that, you take all the dead flowers off. But now, I haven't done that for a while, and I have echiums on my property, and I have learned to not deadhead the echiums, to watch them as they go through their whole cycle. And the bees coming, and I've really taught myself how to appreciate that. Yeah. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm Larry Spitzberg. Love doing watercolors. I've done it for many years. I'm a signature member of the Houston Watercolor Society, vice president of the society. In fact, we have a board meeting right after the meeting here, which I will do by Zoom. So I'll be running after the meeting to the board meeting. I love doing watercolors. I love the transparency of watercolors. And as a good example of that, you could see Eddie's watercolor, and with the transparent watercolors, you could see the different layers coming through. And I find that as a real advantage that I like. So talking about the history of watercolor now, water paint started, 17,000 years ago in the cave paintings in Lascaux, France. In fact, I'm going to be visiting the Lascaux caves in France in October. They've actually closed the caves because the paintings have started to deteriorate, but they got beautiful replicas there that I'm going to see. And then 3,000 years ago, the Egyptians used water paints. They were all opaque water paints, but they used it on papyrus. And then it came a time where everybody did books by hand before the printing press, and there were what they call the illustrations on the books. They did it in watercolor, but what surprises me on that, they called those illustrations illuminations. I have no idea where they got the word illuminations on the first Bibles and books that they did by hand. I thought that's an interesting term, talking about articulate and all as an interesting term. I find illuminations very interesting as well. After that period where you had the cave paintings and the Egyptian paintings, there wasn't a lot in watercolor. It wasn't very popular. In fact, I was thinking of naming the talk Watercolor, the Art with an Inferiority Complex. And the reason being, for many years, actually hundreds of years, watercolors were very secondary to oil painting. In fact, they were used as preliminary sketches to the more serious oil paintings. And in fact, those watercolor paintings, the sketches for oil paintings, were not called paintings, they were called tinted drawings. So find that very interesting. Now there are a couple of exceptions to that. One of the big exceptions is the first photograph here. You all know about Albrecht Dürer and that rabbit that everybody's seen, where you see every hair on the rabbit. That's a famous water painting picture, watercolor picture. This is another one that he did in 1503. So that this fellow, a German painter, could do such beautiful painting in 1503, combination of opaque and transparent watercolors, I just find amazing. And also, in learning history, they didn't even have graphite to draw with at that time. Graphite was invented or found in 1516. This was done in 1503. So he did this whole drawing and painting with the tip of a paintbrush rather than graphite pencil. In fact, the history of a pencil is so interesting. It has to do with wars, accidents, everything like that, the invention of the pencil. But that's another talk on that. So watercolors, nobody was using them, inferiority complex. And then all of a sudden, 18th and 19th centuries, we have the golden age of watercolors in England, really. So what the heck happened to give, nobody was doing it, secondhand stuff, just sketches were done with watercolor, tinted drawings, and all of a sudden, everybody in England was doing watercolors. Well, quite a few things happened at the time. And let me digress a little bit. So what are watercolor paints? Well, the pigments of watercolors are identical to the pigments in oils. They're the same. There's no difference. The difference between oil paints and watercolor paints are the binders. The binder in oil paints, linseed oil. The binder in watercolor paints, gum arabic. It's the sap from an acacia tree. We get almost all of it from the Sudan and Africa. And that solvent, or that gum arabic, forms the solution in water. So it is the binder for the pigment, and it is a solution in water, and so you have the gum arabic and that pigment together. And what happens on the paper then is the watercolor paper, like Eddie used here, has hills and valleys. And watercolor paints, because they're so thin, usually settle down, the pigments do, in the valleys of the watercolor paper. And you still got the hills, which are white. So that gives you the transparency, which I love in the watercolor paintings. So what was it that transpired that changed everything and watercolor became popular? What happened first was in 1766, William Reeve in England invented the watercolor cakes and pans, because at that time you had to make your own watercolor paints before that. So every artist had to mix their own pigment, gum arabic, and a little honey with it too, so it wouldn't crack when it dried. And that's watercolor paint. So William Reeve made the pans, the cakes, and that started the popularity. But at the same time, there were other things. James Whatman in England made great watercolor paper at the same time. Now, paper is paper, but watercolor paper is a little different. So what he did, and what is done in all watercolor papers now, they're cotton rags, as paper is made that way, but it's dipped in an animal glue called sizing. And this sizing is then on the surface of the paper and doesn't allow the watercolor pigment to go into the paper and disperse and become diffuse, but keeps the watercolor right on the surface of the paper. So you had sort of the invention of good watercolor paper, you had the invention of the watercolor pans and cakes, and at the same time it was the Victorian era in England, where everything was pretty stable around Queen Victoria. It was also the industrial age, and in the industrial age you had the rise of the middle classes. And when you had the rise of the middle classes in the Victorian age, you had a lot of, especially the Victorian women, with nothing to do. So what did they do? Now that they had the watercolor pans and you had the good paper, they painted watercolor. So there are some famous Englishmen, David Cox is one of them. He was a fabulous draftsman, and he did great drawings. And the drawings were then in the books. The ladies would copy the drawings in the books. they would take the watercolor paints with their brush, they'd wet the pans and the cakes, and they do nice thin layers of watercolor over the beautiful drawing that the great draftsman David Cox did. And there were many artists that did it that way, and it became tremendously popular all through England. Now, I picked 4 artists to follow so you could see great paintings. And I'm going to start with an artist in that golden age of watercolor, and then I'm going to end with an American modernist painter. So there was Paul Stanby, Constance Cousins, and the best, the most famous, Joseph Mallard William Turner, called JMW Turner. And he was a fabulous draftsman. I mean, look at that painting. He was a fabulous watercolorist. And all the 4 that I'm going to talk about, they also painted in oils as well as the watercolors. But when they did watercolors, they had their own individual styles, which you would discern, okay, that's a Turner, that type of thing. Where in their oils, they were sort of just like everybody else, though they were outstanding in oils as well. So this is a watercolor by Turner. Then here's the next one. I think I've got 5 or 6 by him. He did chips, he did everything. And also the difference in these artists, that they were head and shoulders above their colleagues, is that they used transparent watercolor especially rather than opaque watercolor. And they just didn't do thin layers of the watercolor as popular at the time. They kind of splashed on the watercolor, and they did everything. They took off more watercolor than they put on. They scratched the paper. They did everything to make a good painting. If I could see the next one. So now Turner, as well as having these beautiful realistic watercolor painters, had sort of an abstract style to him as well. And he was born in 1775, and in that time, the Victorian era, I just find it amazing to have an abstract style that we admire today. And the next one, and they're getting more abstract even. In fact, I think his most famous one is when the Houses of Parliament in London were on fire, and you just see these big balls of color, flames, and everything like that. I'm sorry I don't have that one here. And then the next one, also by Turner. Yeah, so we went from these realistic paintings to these almost ethereal, abstract paintings. He was fabulous, head and shoulders above anybody at the time. The next of the 4, you'll recognize him, Winslow Homer. So Homer was an American, is about as American as you could be on that. He was an illustrator in the Civil War. Let's see, he was born 1836 and was an illustrator for Harper's Weekly, the most popular newspaper weekly of the time. But after that, he did his own painting, but started out as an illustrator, fabulous draftsman as well. This is kind of abstract, but you could see how he threw on paint. It just wasn't thin layers and very colorful. The next one, he was an East Coast painter, so did a lot on Maine, but started out painting. So after the Civil War, there was evidently a nostalgia for things past. You know, it was also the Industrial Revolution. So Homer dressed up his models in the costume of years past. In fact, he had girls, ladies dressed up in shepherdess costumes and lambs and everything. We've seen those paintings. Next one then. And you can see how he dressed up the children in the neighborhood so he could paint them as in years past. Because already this was the, 1873 it says, a few years after the Civil War, and this is like pre-Civil War type of paintings. And then the next one, but you can see the beautiful colors. And then he stopped the nostalgia stuff, did more woodsman stuff, painting of the Maine coast, things like this. But he did hire guides to go out in the boats, and then they were his models. There's a beautiful colored watercolor painting. And next one. And he also went to the Bahamas and did some painting there.
If I could just jump in, that one really captures what you said about the process. So if you look at all those leaves, the color couldn't be absorbed into the paper because it would have ruined the precision of the effect, right? Am I getting that right?
Exactly
And
right.
So if it had to be based on those previous discoveries, inventions, whatever term, of the paper and what was used on the paper to make it non-absorbent, if I'm using the correct term.
You are.
And I just think that's absolutely magical as a result.
It is, and the fact that he could have, this is a very boring, it's a wall, is all this is.
Yeah, it just,
But you
Yeah.
can see the transparency where
Right.
he allows the paper to come through. There's no paint here,
Wow.
and then paint there, but you could see through it.
Yeah.
Very ethereal, and then, as Fred said, the real solid colors there above the wall. And then the next one.
wow.
Okay, well, the next artist, we're jumping to artist number 3 now, John Singer Sargent. So he was an American, but really an expatriate. He never lived in America. His family was well-to-do, and when he was young, the family, mom and dad, with him moved to Europe. And so for the rest of his life, he really lived in Europe. Fabulous painter. He achieved his renown first from his oils. He was a great portrait painter. And in fact, one of the stories which I find amusing on this is that he lived in Paris, France for a while, and he submitted his paintings to the yearly Salon in Paris. And one of the paintings was of Madame X, was the title of the painting. And it caused such a stir in Paris. He had beautiful painting of the lady. To me, it was very refined, but he had her one shoulder strap was down. And that was the Victorian era, even though you think of the mores, when you see the different nudes that a lot of the painters did, you'd think the mores were very relaxed, well, they weren't. And he had this lady strapped down off her shoulder here, caused such a stir, he had to leave France and Paris because of it. I mean, nobody would give him commissions anymore because of that. And she was a very prominent socialite in Paris. So he left Paris for England.
Now, was that explicit?
What's
Like,
that?
Was that like almost nudity for them?
Exactly.
It was
Like-
Exactly right.
It was suggested.
It suggested
Almost
that,
pornography.
exactly, yes. It suggested she was a woman of the night rather than a Paris socialite.
But he painted that out.
You're exactly right.
Yes.
Yes. The painting you will see has the strap up on her
Yes,
shoulder
right.
because he had to change the painting.
Right.
And so he yeah, got all his commissions money in his oil paintings
There it is, yes.
rather than
And
the
that's-
watercolor
yes.
paintings.
There
In
we
fact,
go.
he really never wanted to sell his watercolor paintings. The only time he sold his watercolor paintings was when
Yeah. It's,
I think
this
it
one's
used-
strap is up. Oh, this
Oh,
one.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay, let me
That's
see if I
Madame
can
X.
find the,
As he
yeah,
repainted it.
right.
I don't think there are any photographs of it
Right.
before he
This one,
repainted it.
second row.
Yeah,
Black and
second
white.
row. Fourth one from the left.
Also, you know.
Black and
Two,
white.
three, four.
So
This
black and
one?
white.
Black and white, go above it, above that one. Above
Yeah,
that
oh,
one.
this one, oh,
Yeah.
this one, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh.
Yeah,
That's the
right.
original.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Oh my God, I don't think I can look at that.
Yeah. So he had to leave Paris.
I'm having
for
a
that.
headache.
Yeah.
We've come a long way.
We have.
Terrible thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
But this is how big it is, you know, the-
Lord have mercy.
Right.
Right.
Wow.
Forgive me for,
Forgive me.
forgive me.
That's right.
Wow.
Where my
Anyway,
beads?
that's.
Yeah, and so the watercolors were really hobbies to him. So he made hundreds of watercolors, 10 times more than in number of paintings than his oils. Never really sold the watercolors except when museums expressed interest. He insisted that you buy the whole collection or nothing. He would not sell a painting one by one. Actually, he didn't want to bother about it either, because as you see from Eddie's painting, with watercolor paintings, you have to do a lot. You have to mat it, you have to frame it, and it's either plastic or glass glazing in front of it, because otherwise it may deteriorate, because it's on kind of fragile paper. Next one there. Another Sargent painting, just gorgeous. He used what's called, well, he used everything, but one of the things he used is called a resist. And it's like the frisket that Eddie used here to keep the white. So he would put like wax on the paper before he painted where he wanted it not to take the paint. And that's what you see as the sort of the jagged white stuff in the background there. That's using a resist. He used everything.
That's
Next
an
one
amazing
there.
painting.
Another boat
Wow.
painting of his, just gorgeous.
Wow.
The way what he was able to do with the water,
You would never
I know.
do anything
just,
with it.
Just amazing. Well, you could also see from this
Reflections in
painting
the water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that you first put down, and it was said that he dampened or wet the paper at first. And you could see the light colored background that he put on first.
okay.
And then as the background dried, you could see sharper edges of all the foreground paints here that he did. And that's kind of the techniques of watercolor, that you do what's called wet on wet first. And the results are kind of light and blurry edges. And then when that's starting to dry, you put more darker colors on. You go from light to dark in watercolor. And as Eddie said, you gotta plan ahead. That's one of my problems. I don't like planning ahead. I just like what's called watercolor accidents. You know, you put it down, you let the watercolor flow, and who knows sometimes what you get. Next one then. This is a beautiful painting. I mean, because he did portraits whenever he did people, it was just amazing. He loved Venice. This was
Oh,
a painting
my
that he did in
goodness.
Venice. This is when I took the photograph, a reflection there. His painting is much better than that, but you could see how beautifully detailed he would draw as well as.
And is this watercolor too?
And that's watercolor as
Oh,
well.
my
Yeah, all of these are watercolors, right?
Oh, my God.
Yeah, just amazing. Combination of looseness plus the detail. And the next one, I think I've got 8 of John Singer Sargent's. Yeah, beautiful color again. So he would have models. They were his sisters. Who went with him all over Europe. They were his sister's friends, and he set them up. He would give them parasols. He painted out in plein air, just like Heidi was saying. and he would set up his easel. He would have a parasol to block the sun above him, just like he gave the sitters there, and then he would paint them outdoors. And this is, I think, one of his sisters and one of the sister's friends. And then the next one, somewhere in Europe, probably in Switzerland, just a beautiful painting. Next one. Oh, I guess this is a duplicate of, I think, one we saw with the resist.
Well, there was something Heidi that said, it was these paintings, he sees things that I don't see when I look. If I were imagine looking at that, I wouldn't see half of what he captures on this painting.
Right, and then
And
when
this
you,
is so much more profound than
and then
my
also,
eye.
when you get close to it, the detail goes away. And it's only when
Oh.
you and I are back here that we start to see all that detail as well. I think he called this one the derelicts.
Wow.
The next one. And then he went to Africa. This was in a quarry around Morocco, I think.
Do you think this white line, he blocked it or he painted it? Is this a block?
That's a good question. He did
Yeah.
use a lot of
Yeah.
white opaque paint as well.
Really, he has to plan it.
Probably a combination of
Amazing.
both.
Interesting technique, well, or
Yeah.
the use of a light splotch, so to speak, in his paintings. There's a theme there.
Yeah, and you could see the white lines there. That was either scratching the painting, which I think it is, where you have the painting wet when you put the paint down, and then as it starts to dry, you could take a sharp edge, sometimes the opposite side of the paintbrush, the end of the handle, and you drag the end of the handle through, and you wipe away the paint. And that looks to me, you know, what all these white lines are here, just dragging a sharp edge through the sort of damp watercolor paint.
When it's wet?
When it's damp. Yeah, when it's wet, the water paint goes in again, and you can't get that effect. When it's damp, it's dry enough that you could move, and it's just it's a guess as to when it's right. If it's just damp and not wet, you could drag a sharp edge through it, and then the water paint won't go in, it'll stay away, but you could push the water paint away and get your sharp edge. It's sort of a technique where you look at the watercolor paper to the side, and if it has a little glisten, then it's the right dampness to do that. I've messed up loads of watercolor where, you know, you don't wait long enough and it's wet, and when it goes in together, it makes a dark line rather than a light line.
Or you poke a hole.
Or you poke a hole.
Scratch too much,
That's right.
deep, yeah.
Yeah.
Because it
And
is
then the
famous.
next one. So the last of the four, American modernism. And you may or may not have heard of him, John Marin. He was an East Coast painter, called by some people the greatest American painter ever. I don't know about that, but I love his painting. It's kind of abstract. This was probably the Maine coast. He also did New York City. Next one. And then all these four, this is in chronological order, they all kind of overlap between Turner, they overlap a little bit, Turner, Homer, Sargent, and Marin. Marin was born 1870. The next one, I'm not sure. I think this is like an island off of the Maine coast. And then the next one, also water scene off of Maine. And next one, and this is the streets of New York City.
Wow.
I think it was represented by Stieglitz who had a gallery. I think it was called Gallery 250.
291.
291, thank you, in New York City. And Stieglitz represented, I think, 7 famous painters, one of them being John
And
Marin.
Cezanne was another one.
Oh, Sagan was
Yes,
another, okay. Yeah. And he sort of launched Marin's career. I find it interesting, but I don't know what to make of it. Turner wasn't married, Homer wasn't married, Sargent wasn't married, Marin was. So, don't know what to make
Did they
of
have a
that.
muse or?
Of course.
I think they were in love with their art. The others. Next one, also New York City. He had some famous ones where he painted the Chrysler building as standing out from all the other buildings around it. Very non-representational, like this one, almost abstract.
Does anybody who knows New York City well enough, which I don't, have a feeling for where that inspiration came from? In, with 37th and 5th, or where,
Right.
or is it a mixture of
Right.
different blocks? I don't know. It's really remarkable.
Yeah, 1937. He did
It looks
that.
like about 4 different blocks to me.
Yeah. Looks like from a high perspective too. Like he was on a tall building next to those or something.
Do you think that artists could be more experimental in watercolor, or that they were more experimental in watercolor?
Yes, I really do think so, that they allowed their creativity to come through in watercolors where they didn't in oils.
I mean, it didn't matter, right? You weren't
It
gonna
didn't
show
matter as
this,
much.
so
That's
you were
right.
gonna
Well,
be-
the drying time is a big
Yes.
factor.
Yeah, you could do it faster, you could do more
the
watercolors,
creativity
so it
flows.
probably didn't matter as
Yeah.
much. You didn't have to spend a month on it and your life on it as a oil painting. And next one is that, oh yeah, another watercolor landscape by Marin. Next one, okay, so
Wow.
those are my 4 top watercolor painters, but Carmel had some great painters as well. This one, Donald Teague. He lived in Carmel, did a lot of Western scenes,
Beautiful.
actually, was an illustrator. I think he did a lot of storyboards for movies as well. They would do these art paintings to give the director, so the director could give to all the art persons there, the actors and everybody, this is what we want the scene to look like. This one, I don't know where this was at,
He did a
but
lot of Asian also. Did a lot of Asian art.
he did.
Yes, he did.
Oh, okay.
Water and wharfs and
Ah,
boats.
wonderful. Next one. Yeah, here's
Oh,
one of
that's
his
gorgeous.
Western. That's my taking the photo messed it up in the center. And next
And that's a
one,
painting. Wow.
Oh, that's fabulous. Oh, wow.
another Western one there.
Yeah.
And next one, I think this is around here, Monterey. And next one, like the
Number 2
wharf,
for that.
another Western one, 1947. Okay.
Wow.
And then,
Boy, a movie would be so lucky to get that.
yes, that's
And
right.
its introduction, if they actually showed that.
I know, so beautiful, realistic, colorful.
Yeah. Wow.
Next one. So then there's a lady that's painting today. Heidi probably knows her. I just know of her, Alicia Meehan, and she does watercolor at the Carmel Art Association with Heidi there. And I love her work, and I've got some photographs of her work. So she does beautiful landscapes. And next one. And this is of the area here because
Wow.
she lives in the Carmel area. Yeah, just beautiful,
Beautiful color.
loose, colors great.
Wow.
Next one.
Hmm.
Yeah, this is all Alicia's. And next one. And I think Alicia was here maybe 2 months ago I think I saw her here.
Okay.
That going back one, that almost looks like it has some of the Japanese flavor, like they're different plants at different stages of blooming and not blooming. And,
Wabi-sabi.
yeah, it looks, well, to me, I get wabi-sabi out of that.
Is this the last one then?
Yeah, that was
Okay.
the last one.
Yeah, if
Nice assortment.
thank
Very,
you. Thank
very
you.
good, yeah.
Thank
Yeah, if
you.
I have any time, I could talk about, so as Eddie did here, is this 140-pound paper?
I
cold
think so,
pressed?
Yeah.
So watercolor paper comes normally one size,
Can you hold that
20,
up? Can you just hold that up just so I can
or raise it up and
or
show
raise
it.
it up? Yeah, just
Normally comes 22 by 30 size, and then artists do half of it. It's called a half sheet. They do the 22 by 15, and then they do quarter sheets, which is 11 by 15. So when you see watercolor painters, you'll see standard sizes on that. The weights of the paper differ. They got 3 different weights. They call it 90 pound, 140 pound, 300 pound. The most popular and probably the one that Eddie did is the 140 pound. And then they also have what's called hot pressed or smooth, knot or cold pressed, or rough. And the most popular is the knot or cold pressed, as it's called. And that's probably what this, I don't know, this could be smooth. Not sure. The difference is in those hills and valleys I was mentioning, you get bigger hills and valleys in the rough, and when the brush goes over it, you just get into the valleys and you don't get on the hills, and so the watercolor white really comes through and it gets to be really transparent.
What is the 140 pound? Is it the thickness of the paper?
It's what it is actually. It comes from, so if you take 500 sheets of that paper of the 22 by 30 size, it weighs 140 pounds, or a thinner paper weighs only 90 pounds of 500 sheets, and the thicker paper, so it is thickness really, weighs more and weighs 300 pounds. It's more expensive, the 300 pound, by a factor of 2 or 3 over the 140 pound, which most people find acceptable. The only problem with going to the lighter weight papers is that when you wet the paper, it expands. And so when it expands, it buckles.
Yeah.
So over years, they say you got to stretch water paper ahead of time and all that. Hardly anybody I know bothers stretching the paper. You didn't stretch the paper, did you? Nah, I don't stretch the paper either, though I tend to use watercolor blocks, as they're called, where the edge of the paper is glued one on each other, so it's sort of pre-stretched that way, because it'll never shrink or expand if it's glued on the edges already.
So which one is the easiest or most user-friendly paper you would recommend?
What is the one,
Which one?
the cold pressed, the medium between smooth and rough, and the 140 pound? Yeah, so they had the invention of the watercolor pan in 1766 in England. In 1841 in England, though as an American invented it, was the collapsible tube. And Winsor and Newton in England bought the patent for the collapsible tube in 1841. So that became much easier for painters to use all types of paint, watercolor and oils.
Never
Yes,
thought
Eddie.
it was a collapsible tube.
When it comes to oil painting, there's a mistake, you can paint over it.
Yeah,
How about watercolor?
you can't.
You can't.
It
So
be-
you ruined it.
It becomes mud. Yeah, yeah. I've done it a lot. It becomes
So why do
mud.
you continue to be a watercolor when it sounds like, are you a masochist or?
I think I like the immediacy.
You
It's
like
so
the pain?
fast. I mean, I finish a painting in an hour. You know, I draw a sketchy drawing,
Okay,
and then I do painting for an hour, maybe 2 hours, and I'm done. I mean, if I did watercolors, I've talked to some of my colleagues who do watercolor paintings, and some of them take a month and they look gorgeous. Mine are very loose. I use large sheets of paper, but only take a couple hours to do a painting. So it's very fast. I think my personality is such that I don't want to spend 2 weeks on a painting, find out it's a miserable painting after the 2 weeks. You know, it's fine with me to find out it's a miserable painting after 2 hours. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Whoosh.
Thank you.